Today, we're going to journey back in time to uncover a set of ancient texts that really kicked off a philosophical revolution in India, the Aranyakas.
But first, let me ask you something. Just imagine for a second. What if the deepest truths weren't found in busy cities or libraries, but out in the total solitude of the forest? That very idea, well, that's the absolute heart of the text we're about to explore.
And that question leads us right to what these texts are all about. So, what exactly are these forest texts? Well, the name itself is actually our biggest clue. Aranyaka comes straight from the Sanskrit word aranya, which literally means forest. So these are philosophical works that weren't written in grand temples or palaces, but by sages and hermits living deep within the woods. But it's not just where they were written that matters, it's how the forest shaped their whole character. You see, these were advanced studies meant for people who had already lived a full life, raised families, and then retired to the forest to find a deeper meaning. They weren't just about how to perform rituals. They started asking why we do them. And that laid the groundwork for the famous Upanishads.
And this brings us to what is probably their most critical role. The Aranyakas weren't just some new chapter. They were literally the bridge that connected two completely different ways of thinking.
This chart just illustrates that shift perfectly. So the earlier Vedic texts, the Brahmanas, were all about the how, the super precise, correct performance of all the external ceremonies. But the Aranyakas, they turned everything inward. They started focusing on the why, the symbolic internal meaning behind those very same actions. This was a huge, huge pivot from the path of just doing things to the path of understanding. You can see right here where they fit into the grand scheme of things. You go from the hymns of the Samhitas to the rituals of the Brahmanas, all the way to the pure philosophy of the Upanishads. And smack in the middle, the Aranyakas. They are the essential link, that evolutionary step that made the final leap into deep philosophy possible. And because they capture this exact moment of change, they give us these incredible clues about the past. Because here's the thing, these texts aren't just about philosophy. They're almost like accidental history books, offering us this amazing glimpse into the society of ancient India. Take social life, for instance. The texts often talk about the ashrama system, which was basically a framework for the 4 stages of life. The very existence of the Aranyakas brings to life that third stage, the vanaprastha, or the forest dweller, a time when you would retreat from the world to just think. This tells us so much about how deeply that society respected its sages and teachers. And this is where the really big questions start to pop up. It's right here, in the Aranyakas, that we see the first real explorations of concepts like Atman, the individual self, and Brahman, or the ultimate underlying reality of everything. Once they were removed from the hustle of society, these sages in the forest began to ponder the deepest connection of all, the one between us and the entire cosmos. So what about education back then? Well, these texts paint a picture of learning that happens out in nature, not in stuffy buildings. They really highlight that intimate guru-shishya, or teacher-student tradition, where knowledge was passed down directly in forest hermitages. Think of them as the original classrooms under the trees. Okay, so how do we know all of this stuff? Let's look at a few specific examples and see the evidence for ourselves. This table gives us a fantastic snapshot. The Aitareya Aranyaka, for example, talks about kings and state rituals, which tells historians that monarchy was a pretty common form of government. The Taittiriya Aranyaka describes the Varna system, which gives us some idea of the social classes. But the Brihadaranyaka, that one is especially revealing. Because it tells us stories. It doesn't just mention scholar kings, but also brilliant female scholars like Gargi. Now, she famously stood up in a royal court and challenged the most famous male sage of the time to a philosophical showdown. Just that one story shows us that this society had this incredibly vibrant intellectual life, and that women, at least in some circles, had access to the highest levels of education and could even participate in public debates. Amazing. So, when you put it all together, what's the ultimate takeaway? What is the real, lasting legacy of these forest texts? It really comes down to this. The Aranyakas are so much more than just religious texts. They represent a pivotal moment in intellectual history, that crucial bridge from ritual to reason. And just as importantly, they serve as this incredible, indirect window into the social, cultural, and intellectual life of ancient India.
You know, that search for why that began in those ancient forests, it's still going on today inside each and every one of us. That impulse to step away, to find our own quiet space to just think, that's timeless. So I'll leave you with a question. What's your forest? And what's the greatest discovery you've made there?